السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وأنزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. I wanted to begin with something, a statement from Imam al-Suyuti. We know the famous Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. He's one of the two authors of the Jalalain tafsir that people usually go to, the basic one. He said that خمس خصال في الأطفال لو كانت في الكبار مع ربهم لكانوا أولياء. So he said there are 5 attributes that are found in children that if they were possessed by grown-ups, by adults, then we would consider them awliya. So these are some attributes that you find in kids, but it's very uncommon among adults. So here are the 5 attributes. He says, لا يهتمون بالرزق. Kids don't care about material provision. They're not worried about the bills the way that we are. They're not worried about savings. I mean, some kids are, but they're not, it doesn't bother them, right? Where they're completely occupied with material possessions and accumulating things. Number 2, لا يشتكون من خالقهم إذا مرضوا. That they don't complain to those they interact with when they get sick, right? So some of us, when we get sick, we become really dramatic. Oh my God, this hurts, that hurts, right? Kids, they just become kind of quiet and they keep to themselves. They don't go around complaining about how sick they are. Number 3, يأكلون الطعام مجتمعين. They always like to eat together. Kids, normally, if you don't remind them, a lot of them, they'll skip meals. They'll forget about food. But if other people are eating, they're going to be like, okay, where's mine? Right? Because they want to eat with other people. Number 4, إذا خافوا جرت عيونهم بالدموع. That when they get scared, their eyes become filled with tears. So as adults, sometimes we have layers and we're guarded. We don't want to be vulnerable. So we don't want to show how we're really feeling, especially among men. But with kids, it's very authentic and the emotions are very raw. So when kids get scared, they'll usually tell you. They're like, if they're afraid of the dark, they'll say, I'm afraid of the dark, right? Whereas adults won't do that. And number 5, إِذَا تَخَاصَمُوا تَسَارِعُوا إِلَى الصُّلْحِ. That when they get into conflict, they rush to reconcile, right? So kids, they try to resolve their problems better than adults, right? Because sometimes we'll hold on to a grudge or something that bothers us and we'll kind of hold on to it. But kids, they try to reconcile it and they try to find a way to move on. Today, the subject that I wanted to talk about, which is also related to mercy, which is mercy in the heart that causes tears to be shed. Right? So we mentioned 5 things that are missing from most adults. When most of us hear the word fear of Allah, what do we think? Especially in the English language, when we hear fear Allah, it seems like such a negative thing, right? We're like, oh no, that's in some other masjid or some other imam is talking about fear of Allah. It seems like that's a negative relationship with Allah or a negative relationship with your creator, or that's not a healthy part of spirituality. But if we think about it, what does fear of Allah mean? The one that fears Allah in reality fears nothing else. If you fear Allah, then you realize that the good and the bad that you encounter, it only comes from Allah and not from anyone else. And the fear of Allah in their hearts is also the illumination of their hearts. So it's 2 sides of the same coin. That the thing that brings them the most hope and the most optimism is their relationship with Allah, and the thing that they fear the most and that they care about the most is their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So fear is part of any relationship, right? If you care about anyone, you worry about them. So if people who don't have anything to fear and don't care and are completely indifferent are people that are completely isolated. Um, in Surah Al-Bayyinah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the believers are the ones who fear Allah, are those whom Allah radiallahu anhum wa radu an, ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَشِيَ رَبَّهُ. This is the 8th ayah in Surah Al-Bayyinah. Those who Allah is pleased with and they are pleased with Allah, that is for the ones khashiya rabba. And the word khashya is different from khawf, right? So khawf is normally translated as fear. Khashya is to be in a state of awe, right? So when you're so overwhelmed by the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far greater, far more well aware and knowledgeable than you can even begin to imagine, that He exists before the beginning and that He has no ending, and that He will continue to exist eternally, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists outside of time and outside of space. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in Surah Ar-Rahman, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. That as for that Almighty Allah invites those of His servants, right? لِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. So the one who fears, but Allah didn't say لِمَنْ خَافَ رَبَّهُ. He didn't say the one that fears. The one who fears مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. There's two tafsirs, at least. I mean, there's probably 100. But there's two main ways you can understand this. One of them is maqam can be the actual standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What would that mean? If we said, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, that means the one that fears what? A particular situation that we're all going to be in. Which situation is when we have to stand before Allah? On the Day of Judgment. So this is one of the main possible standing. Doesn't mean that you have the fear in that moment, but you fear that reality, that inevitability. So because of that, it moves you, it prompts you to change and to alter your trajectory in your behavior. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. The second one, which I would probably lean towards, is that the one that fears, that person fears their position with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a more general sense, that here I am as a abd, as a servant, as a faqir, as a person that is completely dependent on whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to me. And He is al-ghani. He is independent and free of all wants and all needs. So when you think about it that way, then it moves the person to fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's different from the previous one because the previous one is the fear of what? Because it's the Day of Judgment, so what's the fear about? Fear of punishment. But the one that truly realizes their position and utter dependency on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their fear it includes that, but it's greater. What is that fear? If you truly realize the reality that it's like we're, even like Umar radiallahu anh made the statement, I wish that I was a rock and a stone. I mean, many statements have been made like that. I wish I was, bubble gum on the bottom of a sneaker, But what does that mean? What is that about? But also that we realize that as a human being, as a abd, as a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there are certain huquq, that there are certain rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in that case, you're not just fearing punishment, you're fearing what? That you can't do, that you can't live up to, that you can't fulfill. What type of fear is that? It's not a fear of, I'm going to fail. It's a fear of having to face the teacher. Everybody with me? Because there's a fear that, like, oh, I'm going to get a bad grade, I'm going to fail the test. But then there's another fear, which is that after I fail the test, then I have to show up in class. That if you truly realize your complete dependency, the complete mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so then how could I disobey Him? Everybody with me? So then the idea of sinning becomes detestable to you. The idea of disobeying Allah becomes detestable to you. So you're not fearing the punishment, you're fearing not fulfilling your duty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's a different kind of fear. And this is why some people, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they don't want to be punished. And then there are others that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of hope for reward. And then what is the third level? Out of love. Out of love. Out of recognition that Allah is my Khaliq. He's my creator. He's my Rabb. He didn't just create me and make me and throw me to the wilderness, to my own devices. وَلَا تَكِلْنِي إِلَى نَفْسِي طَرْفَةَ عَيْنٍ وَلَا أَقَلَّ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make dua that, oh Allah, don't leave me alone even for a second. Because what will I do with myself? I'm going to mess everything up. I need you as Rabbul Alameen. As Musa said when he came into a new land as a refugee, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. I am in complete and utter need of whatever goodness you're going to send to me. So fear can mean fear of displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he asked, he said, how can a believer not shed tears at the departure of Ramadan when he doesn't even know if he's going to be alive for another Ramadan or not? And this is what Ibn Rajab, at the end of Ramadan, he would be in tears. He said, who knows? This could be my last Ramadan. That means that after the month of Ramadan, I have to maintain the same level of seriousness. Because we don't want to be Ramadani, we want to be Rabbani. Because, you know, as Qari Anas, he makes the dua. Did you guys probably, even if you don't speak Arabic, you heard it, that don't make us Ubbad, people that worship Ramadan, but rather make us from Ibadik al-Mukhlasin. Make us from the sincere ones that worship you. In At-Tirmidhi, it's mentioned that it's reported that لا يلج النار رجل بكى من خشية الله حتى يعود اللبن في الضرع ولا يجتمع غبار في سبيل الله ودخان جهنم. The one who weeps out of fear of Allah will not enter hell until this is a beautiful Arabic expression, right? Actually, the Turks, they also use this. They have the same expression in Turkish. That until the milk, you know how when a mother nurses the baby? So that baby has the milk, that's it. It's not going back, right? So that means it will never happen. It's like حَتَّى يَلِجَ الْجَمَلُ فِي سَمِّ الْخِيَاطِ, right? It's never going to happen. The dust that is raised in the path of Allah and the smoke of the hellfire will never come together. So how do we cultivate that kind of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sincere tears come to us? Ibrahim, he said, Inni dhahibun ila rabbi sayahdeen. I'm going to my Lord, He's going to guide me. How do we go to Allah? We have to come back to Allah. We're waiting to have a spiritual epiphany. We think spirituality is going to be manufactured. We're going to have the right kind of lighting that's going to be spiritual. We're going to see a video. We're going to see a reel, and that's going to hit us in the right angle. No. Spirituality is more raw than that. It's coming to Allah in a state of inkisar, being in a state of brokenness. That, Ya Allah, I'm not waiting until the moment that I'm perfect, when I got all my salawat exactly right, and I fasted exactly the right fast. I'm coming to you flawed. I'm coming to you the way that I am. If I wait for perfection, it's never going to happen. But in a state of complete need and dependence on you, Ya Allah. Right? And you take those tears to the prayer mat. You come to Him, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing ujibu da'wat ad-da'i idha da'an. You go with Him with that hope, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers. And then what ends up happening is there's a movement of the heart. And the strength of Iman moves you, and it becomes physical. There's a movement of the heart and it becomes a movement of the limb. Right? And so people, they don't have that physical reaction because the movement of the heart didn't happen. And that itself is a great gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To have a heart that trembles. وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. For the heart to feel that. تَقْشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ ثُمَّ تَلِينُ جُلُودُهُمْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Skin that shudders at hearing the verses of the Quran. Eyes that shed tears for the sake of Allah. We also heard the dua from Qari Anas in the last few days, that we ask Allah for refuge min aynin la tadma', from an eye that doesn't shed tears, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last hadith that I'm going to share with you is from Ibn Majah in Bab al-Zuhd. He said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ما من عبد مؤمن تخرج من عينيه دمعة وإن كانت مثل رأس الذباب من خشية الله تعالى ثم تصيب شيئا من حر وجهه إلا حرمه الله على النار. There is no believer who has wept tears out of fear of Allah. Allahumma ja'alna minhum. Before we go any farther, the Prophet he said, there's no servant who has wept tears out of fear of Allah. And the word is khashya, which we talked about. Be that tear as small as the size of a fly, but enough to wet their cheeks, for whom Allah has forbidden the eternal fire. Does everybody realize the significance, the magnitude of what this hadith is saying? It means that an eye that has shed tears is safe. Why is it safe? Why is that eye, why is that body safe? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His mercy is not punish an eye that has shed tears in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as we're praying our tahajjud now, I'm inviting myself first and foremost and all of you to give it complete attention. Give it complete khushu' and awareness and presence. Allow yourself to feel and to move with the verses. When we go up with it. When it goes down, go down with it. Be a passenger. Is everybody with me? We're going to be a passenger in the next recitation, inshallah. And you're going to see a difference. Some people, because you get caught up, you're like, I don't understand Arabic. You get caught up in that. And then you get into that mental space and you get stuck on that. Don't get stuck on that. Don't have a hang up. Just be a passenger and ride that. And you're going to taste the halawa. You're going to taste the sweetness of the salah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the sweetness of the Quran and give us the sweetness of Iman. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a proof for us and not a proof against us. وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.